You really think you belong here? Emily Prescott's voice sliced through the polished lobby like a sudden gust of wind, sharp and uninvited. As Marcus Thompson adjusted the strap of his messenger bag and looked up, his dark eyes calm, steady, refusing to mirror the indignation painted across her face. The marble floors gleamed beneath the towering chandelier, reflecting the swirl of guests' heels and the subtle shimmer of her gold bracelets, while the scent of fresh orchids and the faint tang of citrus from the cleaning crew mingled in the air. Yet all Marcus noticed was the slight tremor in her hand as she stepped forward. The lobby had gone quiet, a hush spreading across the room as staff and visitors alike turned to witness the confrontation, their murmurs fading into a tense silence. Emily raised her chin, lips pressed in a thin line, the edge of her silk scarf brushing against her shoulder like a warning, and in that moment Marcus felt the weight of the space, not as fear, but as a pulse, a rhythm to which he could synchronize without losing his composure. He shifted his stance slightly, letting the bag rest against his hip, and his gaze swept briefly over the reception desk, the polished counters catching the soft morning lights streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, dust motes dancing like tiny stars suspended in the air. Around them, the clink of fine china from the cafe corner faded, replaced by the unspoken question hovering in everyone's minds. How would Marcus respond? He did not flinch. He did not speak. Instead, he tilted his head subtly, eyes narrowing just enough to suggest awareness without confrontation, a silent signal that he saw the situation for what it was but refused to be dictated by it. Emily's hand twitched, and a half-empty glass of sparkling water wobbled precariously, the liquid inside catching the sunlight in brief, bright flashes before settling again. The motion drew the gaze of a nearby guest, who blinked rapidly, unsure if they should intervene or continue observing. Marcus exhaled slowly, a controlled, deliberate breath that seemed to absorb the tension around him rather than feed into it. And in that pause the air itself seemed to hold, waiting for the first move, the first word, the smallest shift that would break the frozen tableau. The staff behind the counters exchanged glances, some leaning slightly forward, others pressing lightly against the tops of the marble surfaces, their hands gripping pens and menus, as if bracing for an eruption that never came. And then Marcus stepped forward, each movement measured, deliberate, the soft soles of his shoes barely whispering against the polished stone, his presence commanding attention not through volume or force, but through the quiet certainty that he was fully present, fully aware, and entirely unafraid of the sudden storm he had walked into. Marcus shifted his weight slightly, the strap of his messenger bag brushing against his shoulder as he surveyed the lobby with quiet attention, noticing the subtle details most would overlook, from the polished brass handles on the revolving doors to the delicate pattern of the Persian rug beneath the receptionist's feet, each thread woven with care, reflecting the hotel's meticulous standards. He took a measured step forward, letting the light from the towering windows highlight the subtle lines of concentration on his face, his dark skin catching the glow without a trace of apprehension, and his eyes moved deliberately across the room, noting the expressions of the guests who now lingered in mid-step, their conversations suspended as they watched the unfolding scene. The floral arrangements, strategically placed along the edges of the lobby, sent faint fragrances into the air, mingling with the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant echo of elevators rising and descending, a symphony of order that Marcus absorbed calmly, every sensory detail recorded yet not overwhelming him. He adjusted his tie, a simple black silk, and smoothed the cuff of his crisp white shirt, small gestures that conveyed discipline and composure without fanfare. Behind him, the reception desk gleamed under the ambient lighting, and he could see the faint reflection of his shoes in the highly polished marble, grounding him, reminding him of the stability in his posture and the steadiness in his presence. As he moved toward the center of the lobby, the subtle click of his shoes resonated lightly, a rhythm that contrasted with the soft murmur of voices gradually rising as guests speculated on the nature of the confrontation. But Marcus remained undistracted, each sound cataloged and noted without altering his calm demeanor. The security personnel stationed discreetly near the entrance glanced up, assessing the situation, their trained eyes taking in the height, stance, and movements of the figures in the room. Yet, Marcus projected no threat, only awareness. He inhaled slowly, the scent of polished wood, freshly laundered linens, and a hint of citrus from the cleaning crew layering together, creating an atmosphere that was both refined and familiar, a setting in which he felt fully present. He moved past the concierge station, giving a brief nod to the attendant who held a tablet ready to assist guests, acknowledging their presence without interrupting the flow of events. His gaze then settled briefly on a large, ornate clock mounted on the far wall, its pendulum swinging with quiet precision, marking each second with an even, measured rhythm, a silent reminder that the moment he occupied was as significant as it was fleeting. Marcus's posture remained impeccable, shoulders squared, head held high, radiating quiet confidence rather than arrogance, and his movements were deliberate yet unassuming, a study in poise under scrutiny. He observed the patterns of light shifting across the marble floor as the morning sun moved through the expansive windows, noting how the reflections danced across the polished surfaces, a subtle play of brightness and shadow that seemed to mirror the tension lingering in the room. Every detail of the space, the arrangement of furniture, the angles of mirrors, the placement of decorative accents, registered in his mind, informing his awareness of the environment and reinforcing the calm authority he projected without uttering a single word. Marcus continued to move with purpose, the faint echo of his steps harmonizing with the soft murmurs of the gathered guests, maintaining a composed, steady presence that contrasted with the rising agitation of those who had instigated the confrontation, all while keeping his senses finely attuned to the subtle cues of human behavior unfolding around him. Emily Prescott straightened, the sharp edges of her tailored jacket catching the light from the chandelier above, casting angular shadows across her expression, and Marcus's eyes followed the subtle twitch of her hand as she adjusted the strap of her purse, her polished nails glinting faintly in the soft glow of the lobby. The crowd of onlookers shifted, some stepping back as if instinctively sensing the gravity of the moment, while others leaned forward, curiosity etched across their faces, their conversations reduced to murmurs and stifled breaths. Marcus's gaze swept over the scene with measured calm, noting the delicate balance of the space around him, the carefully arranged seating areas with their low tables and decorative vases, the floor-to-ceiling windows revealing a slice of the city outside, and the soft light filtering through sheer curtains, illuminating the faint patterns in the marble beneath his shoes. He paused briefly near the center of the room, observing the subtle gestures of the staff, their hands resting lightly on counter edges, pins and reservation books poised, waiting to see whether decorum would be maintained or disrupted further. Emily took a step closer, her heels clicking softly against the marble, the sound punctuating the tense silence like a metronome measuring the room's anticipation, and Marcus noted the slight tightening of her jaw, the way her eyes flicked toward the guests and then back to him, the combination of pride and apprehension mingling in the set of her shoulders. The floral arrangements along the perimeter exuded a faint scent of jasmine and citrus, the aroma intermingling with the clean, polished atmosphere of the lobby, creating a sense of refinement that contrasted with the unspoken challenge passing between them. Marcus straightened his posture, squared his shoulders, and shifted his weight evenly, the subtle movements controlled and deliberate, reflecting his inner focus and unyielding composure despite the social pressure pressing in from all sides. He allowed his gaze to linger momentarily on the brass elevator doors at the far end, noting their reflective surface and the way the morning light glinted off the polished metal, before returning his attention to Emily, the ambient sound of conversation and footsteps fading into a soft, unobtrusive hum that seemed almost to respect the intensity of the standoff. The air itself seemed to hold, charged with expectation, and Marcus moved with the quiet authority of someone fully aware of both his surroundings and the presence of the powerful figure before him, taking a slow, measured step forward, his hand brushing lightly against the strap of his bag, a small gesture that spoke of calmness and preparation. Emily's breath caught slightly, her lips parting as if to speak, but no words came, and Marcus's eyes held hers steadily, a silent acknowledgment of the challenge without the need for aggression, his calm demeanor creating a counterbalance to her display of dominance, reinforcing the contrast between intent and presence, status and character, as the room collectively exhaled, the tension palpable yet controlled, every movement, every glance, every detail coalescing into a tableau of poised confrontation that set the stage for what would unfold next. Marcus took a deliberate step closer, his movements smooth and confident, each one measured to convey presence without confrontation. And as he reached the center of the lobby, his gaze fell on the polished brass handles of the grand entrance doors, noting the reflection of guests and staff alike in the gleaming surface. Their faces a mixture of curiosity, hesitation, and expectation. The sunlight streaming through the expansive windows highlighted the texture of his tailored suit, a deep navy blue that contrasted sharply with the warm tones of the marble floors beneath his polished shoes, and the subtle pattern of the Persian rugs caught the light in intricate detail, guiding the eye along the carefully arranged pathways of the lobby. Emily Prescott's posture stiffened, the slight narrowing of her eyes and the tilt of her chin indicating a shift from irritation to focused attention, and Marcus observed this with calm precision, aware of every microexpression, the faint quiver of her hand, the barely perceptible sigh as she adjusted the hem of her silk blouse. He lifted his hand slowly, pointing towards the edge of the reception desk where a folder of papers lay slightly askew, the sunlight glinting off the corner of the binder, and in a voice measured, calm, and even, he spoke, articulating clearly the overlooked clause that had the potential to change the understanding of the agreement between the hotel and its guests, his words steady and precise, carrying an authority born not of position but of knowledge. The ambient sounds of the lobby, the soft hum of the air conditioning, the distant click of high heels, the muted chatter of staff, faded into the background as the room seemed to contract around the interaction, attention focused solely on the exchange unfolding. Emily's eyes widened imperceptibly, a subtle intake of breath that did not escape unnoticed by Marcus. And for a brief moment, the tension in the room crystallized, the contrast between her shock and his composed demeanor drawing the attention of every onlooker. The light from the chandeliers bouncing softly off the polished marble, reflecting in the glass surfaces of the tables and railings, capturing the suspended moment with cinematic clarity. Marcus continued to speak, his tone unwavering, detailing the implications of the oversight, the room listening intently, the guests frozen mid-step, staff leaning slightly forward as if drawn in by the gravity of his words, the air heavy with anticipation and the realization that control was being re-examined. Each gesture he made was precise and understated, a nod here, a slow step there, commanding attention through presence rather than volume. And Emily, sensing the correctness of his observation, allowed a subtle shift in her posture, the rigid lines of authority softening slightly as comprehension replaced surprise. The lobby seemed to breathe around them, the soft reflections of light shifting with the movement of the sun across the windows, accentuating the dramatic contrast between authority and humility, status and insight. And Marcus stood at the center, calm and assured, a figure of composed integrity, while Emily's expression transformed slowly, the first glimmers of acknowledgment appearing, her initial shock giving way to recognition. The room silent except for the quiet rhythm of his words, filling the space with clarity and presence, setting the stage for the next moment of revelation. Emily Prescott's lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes narrowing slightly as she attempted to reclaim her composure. But the subtle shift in her posture betrayed the momentary loss of control, and Marcus observed every detail with careful calm. The muscles in his jaw relaxed, his shoulders squared, radiating an unshakable confidence that seemed to anchor the room around him. Guests and staff alike held their breath, the soft rustle of fabric and the faint click of heels punctuating the otherwise still air, each sound amplified by the tension that now stretched across the polished marble floors. Marcus allowed his gaze to sweep across the gathered crowd, noting their fascination, the way some whispered cautiously to one another, the slight tilt of heads as they processed the unexpected turn of events, and the subtle glances exchanged between Emily and her entourage, their silence revealing both shock and reconsideration of the assumptions they had brought into the lobby. The sunlight filtering through the large windows created shifting patterns on the floor, dancing across the edges of the ornate rugs, highlighting the intricate designs in a soft, golden hue. and Marcus's presence seemed to absorb the light, reflecting composure and quiet authority without a word spoken. Emily lifted her hand slightly, perhaps to adjust the cuff of her sleeve or to steady her balance. But the movement was minimal, a micro-gesture that Marcus registered immediately, a sign that the moment had shifted from confrontation to recognition, the room collectively sensing the change. His voice remained calm and measured, articulating the implications of the contract details, each word deliberate and precise, drawing attention without demanding it, guiding understanding rather than asserting dominance. The staff behind the counters straightened instinctively, pens poised, not as if awaiting instructions, but in recognition of the clarity Marcus projected, the subtle authority carried in his measured movements and composed demeanor. Marcus's eyes flicked briefly toward the elegant clock mounted high on the wall, its pendulum swinging steadily, marking the passage of seconds in quiet consistency, a rhythm that mirrored his own inner steadiness. And then back to Emily, whose expression had softened just enough to hint at acknowledgment, the faint tension around her mouth easing imperceptibly. The guests shifted slightly, the air of anticipation gradually giving way to attentive curiosity, and Marcus's subtle gestures, tilting his head, a slow step to adjust position, hands relaxed at his sides, reinforced the sense of control grounded in understanding rather than authority, presence rather than power. Around them, the lobby maintained its refined atmosphere, the floral arrangements gently perfuming the space, the polished surfaces reflecting light in gentle flares, and the sound of distant conversation dimmed to an unobtrusive murmur as attention remained focused on the central interaction, the quiet dynamics between Marcus and Emily revealing the unspoken balance of awareness, integrity, and the subtle power of knowledge in the midst of an expectant crowd. Each detail, the tilt of a head, the positioning of a foot, the glint of a watch or bracelet, registered in Marcus's awareness, informing his movements, sustaining the equilibrium in the space, and allowing the room to exist in a suspended state where observation and composure dictated the flow, anticipation holding steady as the next moment unfolded naturally. Marcus exhaled slowly, letting the tension of the previous moment settle around him. His posture relaxed but purposeful as he shifted slightly to allow the morning light streaming through the grand windows to fall evenly across his face, highlighting the calm determination in his dark eyes. The lobby seemed to stretch in the silence, the polished marble reflecting both the soft natural light and the muted colors of the guest's attire, each detail rendered crisp and tangible in the stillness of the space. Marcus's gaze swept over the room, noting the delicate movements of the staff, the subtle adjustments of a chair here, the quiet straightening of a jacket there, all small gestures that underscored the heightened attention without overt reaction, and he absorbed each one with measured composure, letting the observation itself become a part of his calm authority. The floral arrangements, carefully placed in clusters near seating areas and along the walls, exuded a faint, consistent aroma of jasmine and citrus, mingling with the polished scent of the marble and the distant whir of air conditioning, creating an atmosphere that was refined and subtly dynamic, alive with the quiet presence of attentive eyes. Emily Prescott stood a few steps away, her expression caught between disbelief and recognition, the slight softening of her posture revealing the first acknowledgment of the situation's weight, while Marcus remained a figure of controlled focus, his movements deliberate yet understated, a slight tilt of his head, a measured step, the subtle relaxation of his shoulders, all contributing to the silent narrative unfolding between them. The guests watched, their own reactions muted but perceptible, the quiet shuffle of shoes against marble, the soft murmur of conversation between couples and colleagues, each sound captured in the ambient space, yet all centered on the subtle exchange that defined the moment. Marcus allowed his eyes to trace the intricate details of the lobby's architecture, the curvature of the staircase, the intricate moldings along the ceiling, the interplay of light and shadow on the walls, grounding himself in the space while maintaining full awareness of the social dynamics around him. He shifted his weight slightly, the soft sound of his polished shoes against the floor echoing faintly, marking the rhythm of his calm presence as a contrast to the rising realization in Emily's expression, the subtle tilt of her chin, the tightening of her lips, and the gentle arch of her brow signaling the dawning understanding of the oversight she had almost imposed. The lobby seemed to pause, the usual ebb and flow of movement temporarily suspended as Marcus remained composed in the center, a quiet anchor, radiating confidence and integrity without uttering another word, letting the room absorb the weight of the moment, the soft glow of sunlight shifting across marble and glass, catching on polished surfaces and casting delicate reflections that highlighted the stillness and the unspoken acknowledgment forming in the space between him and Emily. The atmosphere holding a delicate balance of tension, clarity, and quiet resolution that lingered in every corner of the lobby. Emily Prescott's eyes widened as she finally examined the contract Marcus had indicated, her hand hovering over the papers as she scanned each line, the intricacy of the clauses becoming suddenly apparent in the ambient morning light streaming through the lobby windows. Marcus remained calm, hands relaxed at his sides, allowing her the space to comprehend the oversight without interruption, his presence steady and unobtrusive, yet commanding attention through quiet confidence alone. The staff and guests watched silently, the soft hum of conversation and movement reduced to a background whisper as the gravity of the revelation took hold, the lobby seemingly holding its breath in unison. Emily's brow furrowed as she read further, realizing the significance of the missed detail, her lips parting slightly, an audible exhale escaping as the clarity of the situation settled in, and Marcus's gaze followed each subtle microexpression, noting the moment of acknowledgment without the need for words. The polished marble floors reflected the sunlight in sharp streaks, catching the edges of the documents and the subtle sheen on Emily's carefully chosen accessories, creating a visual interplay of light and shadow that mirrored the tension and sudden shift in understanding. Marcus allowed the quiet to linger, letting the pause between discovery and reaction stretch, the ambient sounds, the faint echo of heels, the soft clinking of glassware from the distant cafe, the subdued rustle of clothing, merging into a delicate backdrop that framed the silent unfolding of recognition. Emily adjusted her posture, the rigid lines of authority softening imperceptibly as she processed the implications, a subtle tilt of her head, a shift of weight from one foot to the other, each movement amplified by the attentive silence around them. While Marcus's presence remained a composed anchor, the contrast between his calm and her dawning realization heightening the impact of the moment. Guests exchanged glances, their curiosity tempered by the quiet intensity, observing the transformation from confrontation to comprehension, and the subtle tension in Emily's shoulders eased, the tightness around her mouth softening just enough to reveal the first trace of humility. Marcus stepped slightly forward, not imposing but reinforcing his quiet authority, eyes steady and unflinching, letting the clarity of truth dominate the space without the need for loud declaration. While the sunlight caught in the folds of the contract and the reflective surfaces around the lobby, casting gentle highlights that seemed to underscore the shift in power. Emily's lips pressed together briefly as she completed her review, and her gaze lifted slowly to meet Marcus's, a mixture of surprise and newfound respect passing between them, unspoken yet entirely understood. While the crowd remained still, the ambient sounds muted, and the lobby bathed in soft, even light that emphasized both the resolution of the moment and the unyielding integrity of the man who had quietly commanded recognition. Marcus's expression softened slightly as he took a step back, allowing the weight of the situation to settle fully into the room, the subtle shift in his posture signaling calm authority without assertion, and Emily Prescott, catching the nuance of his demeanor, exhaled slowly, her shoulders relaxing as she allowed a trace of humility to show, the rigid lines of control easing just enough to reveal acknowledgment and respect. The morning light streamed through the expansive windows, illuminating the intricate patterns of the marble floor and the polished brass of the elevators, creating a gentle interplay of reflection and shadow that mirrored the subtle shift in power, while the guests remained still, observing the unspoken exchange with quiet fascination, the ambient hum of conversation reduced to an attentive hush. Marcus allowed his hands to rest naturally at his sides, fingers lightly brushing the strap of his messenger bag, his gaze sweeping the room with deliberate calm, noting the reactions of staff and visitors alike, the slight widening of eyes, the careful adjustment of posture, the subtle leaning forward of those eager to see what would unfold next, all captured in the serene authority of his presence. Emily moved her hand to adjust a loose strand of hair, a micro-gesture that betrayed the mix of surprise and respect now taking shape, and Marcus observed without comment, letting the moment speak for itself, the quiet strength of his poise serving as its own lesson in composure and integrity. The polished surfaces of the lobby, the sleek counters, the reflective floor, the smooth marble staircase, caught the light and created soft glints that punctuated the calm atmosphere, accentuating the contrast between Marcus's grounded presence and the initial tension that had filled the space. Around them, the floral arrangements exuded a delicate fragrance, blending jasmine and citrus with the subtle warmth of the sunlight, adding a sensory softness that counterbalanced the intensity of the social realization unfolding, while the lobby remained a tableau of poised observation, each movement measured, each glance carrying significance without the need for words. Marcus finally spoke, his voice low and even, not commanding but explanatory, highlighting the importance of attention to detail and the integrity inherent in careful observation, and Emily's gaze lifted, absorbing the words fully, her posture straightening in acknowledgment of both the correctness of his insight and the patience with which he had conveyed it. The guests continued to watch, the silence punctuated by the occasional soft breath or subtle shuffle, the lobby filled with the tangible sense of resolution settling over the room like a gentle weight, and Marcus, standing in quiet dignity at the center, projected a sense of authority derived from knowledge and ethical clarity rather than status or volume, while Emily's features softened completely, her initial shock replaced by the beginnings of reflection and appreciation, the space around them harmonized in recognition of the subtle yet profound reversal of understanding that had taken place. Every detail, the glint of sunlight on a polished surface, the faint aroma of flowers, the soft ripple of clothing as people adjusted stance, the calm steadiness of Marcus's presence, coalesced into a moment of unspoken reconciliation and moral clarity, a quiet affirmation that respect and insight could transform perception and restore balance within a room that had just witnessed the shift from arrogance to acknowledgment. Marcus stepped lightly toward the grand entrance doors, the soft echo of his shoes blending with the faint hum of the lobby, and the morning sun poured through the expansive windows, casting long, golden streaks across the polished marble, highlighting the subtle shimmer of his dark suit and the calm, assured set of his shoulders. Emily Prescott remained a few paces behind. Her expression softened completely, the rigid lines of authority relaxed as she allowed herself to absorb the lesson of the moment, eyes tracking Marcus as he moved with composed intent, the gentle sway of the floral arrangements in the breeze from the slightly open doors reflecting the quiet rhythm settling over the room. Guests and staff alike remained still, the air thick with the shared recognition of the resolution. Soft footsteps and faint murmurs now harmonizing into a subdued ambient layer, the atmosphere filled with the subtle weight of understanding rather than confrontation. Marcus paused near the center, letting the space breathe around him, his hands at his sides, posture poised and balanced as light caught on the edges of the elevator doors, the brass gleaming faintly and reflecting the intricate patterns of the lobby, while Emily's gaze followed every nuanced gesture, noting the deliberate control and quiet dignity that radiated from him without a single word. The scent of fresh flowers mingled with polished wood and marble, a delicate fragrance underscoring the gentle conclusion of tension, while the guests adjusted slightly, some leaning in imperceptibly, others straightening their posture. The collective attention centered on the unspoken reconciliation forming in the room. Marcus turned his head slightly, eyes meeting Emily's with calm clarity, a subtle acknowledgment passing between them. The contrast between her initial shock and now evident respect rendered in the softened line of her jaw and the relaxed positioning of her hands. Light shifted across the lobby floor, highlighting the interplay of patterns in the marble, the subtle reflections in the mirrored surfaces, and the glint of sunlight on the polished brass, all creating a quiet cinematic tableau that mirrored the moral and social balance restored between the two figures. Marcus began to move toward the reception desk, each step measured, the soft click of his shoes against the floor marking the rhythm of composed authority, while Emily allowed herself to follow his movement with a sense of reflective calm, her posture upright, but no longer rigid, the tension released into quiet understanding. The guests watched, some shifting slightly in their seats, others remaining motionless, absorbing the subtle but profound shift of perception that had occurred, the ambient sounds, soft conversations, the distant hum of the elevators, the gentle rustle of clothing, blending into a quiet symphony underscoring the moment's significance. Marcus reached the desk, a gentle tilt of his head toward Emily, signaling acknowledgment without dominance, and the lobby seemed to exhale collectively, the sunlight now fully illuminating the polished surfaces, the intricate floral arrangements, and the calm authority of the man whose presence had transformed both the perception and atmosphere of the space. Each detail, the reflections, the sense, the faint echo of movement, the soft warmth of sunlight, coalesced into a final, unspoken resolution, a quiet affirmation that integrity, awareness, and respect could redefine understanding in a space that had once been filled with tension, leaving the room in a state of serene equilibrium, the moral clarity of the moment lingering in every glance, every subtle gesture, and every reflected ray of light.